God and Science by John W. Dawley. Copyrighted by the John W. Dawley Trust. Narrated by Michael Drew. Chapter 5. The Enigma of Evil. The question now arises, what is it that mankind needs to be delivered from? This question, of course, resolves itself into the consideration of the enigma of evil and of all materiality. The contribution of the physical scientist to exact thinking. It's well to remember that many physicists, as has already been shown, now admit that the material world is primarily the outcome of mortal thought and is based on physical sense testimony. It is often at the door of the physical scientist that the responsibility is laid for the attempt to establish the importance of the physical or material at the expense of the spiritual and moral. But there is another side to this picture, and sooner or later it will be recognized that we owe a great debt to that fearless body of physicists who, in their determination to find truth, have established the supreme value of accurate and scientific thinking, often at the expense of their own theories, and who have asserted the individual's right to think fearlessly and unrestrictedly. Unfortunately, though the physical scientist has established the immense value of exact thinking, he is frequently forced to admit that the subject of his investigations, the material or physical, does not finally permit of exact conclusions. The author feels convinced that eventually the physicist's demand for accurate and scientific conclusions must lead him to forsake the material, and to accept the fact that only in spiritual reality, in the realm of divine ideas, can absolute truth be found. When the time comes that this great body of cultured men and women in every corner of the world turns its attention to the scientific investigation of spiritual reality and its infinite availability, then inevitably mankind will witness the wedding of science and religion on both a scientific and spiritual basis. The outcome of this union will be undreamed of progress, and great freedom both from the uncertainty and destructive nature of merely materialistic theories, and also from the vagueness and mysticism of conventional religion. In this connection, let us recall the words of Charles Steinmetz, already quoted in this book. Some day, people will learn that material things do not bring happiness, and are of little use in making men and women creative and powerful. Then the scientists of the world will turn their laboratories over to the study of God and prayer and the spiritual forces which, as yet, have hardly been scratched. When this day comes, the world will see more advancement in one generation than it has seen in the last 4. A sound basis for fundamental reasoning. The so-called physical universe is a very limited concept of reality, and so to attempt to understand a reality merely by reasoning from that finite concept and from the testimony of the physical senses is of course fatal. Speaking of a human attempt to understand reality when reasoning from a purely material basis, Sir James Jeans writes, in The Universe Around Us, "Indeed, it may be doubted whether we shall ever properly understand the realities ultimately involved. They may well be so fundamental as to be beyond the grasp of the human mind." Spiritual realities will always be beyond the grasp of the human mind, but they will ever be accessible to what the Bible terms the mind of Christ, which knows only absolute spiritual conclusions, and which we can all reflect in some measure. Jesus, who manifested perfectly the mind of Christ, was the most exact and profound thinker our planet has known. As we understand reality itself on both a spiritual and scientific basis, we shall be enabled to analyze intelligently our present finite sense of the universe, which appears to us to be material. As one understands in its purity any subject, for instance mathematics, engineering, music, one can analyze with ease mistakes in that field and also appreciate at its true value a partial approximation to the subject. But one cannot reverse the process and comprehend any subject in its purity by contemplating a limited or mistaken sense of it. Our conclusions about the material, then, will only be intelligent and worthwhile when they are derived from absolute spiritual and scientific fact. To reason intelligently as to the fundamental reality, one must start from a sound basis, and the only safe and sure point to start from is the fact of one infinite cause. In the words of the Bible, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." The nature of the one infinite cause. Most people will admit that since there is an effect which we term existence, there must necessarily be a cause, and this cause is generally conceded to be infinite. Even if we consider the material universe and bear in mind the fact that this physical universe includes myriad worlds and endless diversification of species, it would not be far-fetched to admit that, even judged from this limited point of view, the one cause must be of the nature of infinity. Granted that the first cause is infinite, it must therefore be ever present, and consequently of the nature of mind, for nothing can be ever present but mentality. With his mentality a man can be anywhere, whereas his corporeality is always localized. Also, to be infinite, this cause must be wholly good, for if the infinite cause contained an element of evil, it would continually destroy itself. If our human experience proves only one thing, it is the finite and destructive nature of evil and materiality. Materiality inevitably involves divided interests, fear, hate, jealousy, envy, greed, terror, death, and desolation of every kind. It always involves a beginning and an end. It is a kingdom divided against itself. It involves the theories of minds many, instead of the fact of one divine mind, God, and his universe of perfect spiritual ideas. One infinite cause, wholly good and of the nature of divine mind, could only express itself as an infinitude of divine ideas, also wholly good. This infinite perfection of divine cause and its universe of ideas is the basic fact of the Bible teaching, and enforces the demand, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." Perfect cause must logically postulate a perfect effect. The human mind, however, with its dependence on material things, on change, chance, luck, and mysticism, almost resents the spiritual teaching of a perfect cause and a perfect effect. One perfect divine and infinite cause, or mind, must forever express itself as infinite spiritual thoughts or ideas, each as specific and individual as its cause, and each eternally perfect. Evil, a misapprehension of reality. At this point the author can hear this question from many a reader. If the divine mind is infinite and is wholly good, how can there be a carnal mind, and how can evil and materiality exist? The problem of evil and its origin is inexplicable, because evil has no fundamental reality. It is just a mistaken or material sense of truth. One cannot explain a mistake. One can only explain it away with truth. The only explanation of mistakes in mathematics is to be found in mathematics itself. Mistakes are the result of ignorance and erroneous thinking. Ignorance believes in and supports its own mistaken sense. Material existence and all that it includes is an imperfect apprehension of reality, which believes in itself and perpetuates itself through its own mistaken reasoning. Materiality can never touch truth, which is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Materiality does, however, claim to counterfeit truth, and it accepts its own counterfeit as true. The world's greatest Christian thinker described the devil, the whole problem of evil, sin, materiality, death, and so on, as a liar and the father of it. The irresistible advance of civilization. What happens to ignorance of mathematics as the student understands more of the subject? It disappears. As it disappears, one may say that the student is becoming more mathematically minded. But mathematics itself has never changed, has never ceased to be a perfect system, ever available and ever provable. A similar fact becomes apparent if we imagine humanity to be a student of fundamental cause. According to the physicists and geologists, our material universe has existed for somewhere around 2,000 million years, and according to their theories, the physical universe began in mist, slime, and darkness, a sense of ignorance. However, there must have been from the start the impulse to progress, and then to discover, to know, and to understand. In the search for reality, admittedly, many wrong paths were pursued. But very early in its seeking, humanity reached the conviction that there was a positive power outside of and apart from this mist and slime, or materiality, and this conviction has always been the vital factor in human development. Step by step, humanity's ignorance or blind materiality has begun to disappear, and this development has culminated in the civilization that we know today. It may be asked, what impelled this conviction, and what caused this constant development? Was it merely chance? No. Civilization has advanced and will continue to advance, because the infinite cause is always expressing itself as one ideal, or Christ, and this ideal is forever being translated to men as infinite ideas of reality. Because of this irresistible and ordered appearing of spiritual reality, humanity has been forced progressively to forsake, in some degree, its limited and mistaken sense of the universe as material and finite. The forever appearing of reality has in fact involved the disappearing of ignorance and materiality, and this must ever continue. But all the time the infinite principle, God, and its infinite calculus of spiritual ideas has remained unchanged. It was and is ever available and ever provable to spiritual consciousness, because it is the same yesterday and today and forever. The one infinite cause, then, is always translating itself as the divine message from God to man, and this impulsion we term the coming of the Christ. This omni-active Christ ideal, in spite of ignorance and materiality, has brought about the civilization that we know today. In the face of this advancing sense of civilization, the fading picture of materiality seems at times to look pretty grim, but this is inevitable. Spiritual evolution always brings revolution. The unworthy must be seen to be unworthy, and so disappear. The appearing of the Christ idea in our scientific age as absolute truth to be understood and proved need not, however, bring suffering in its wake, and it will not do so if there is willingness to progress spiritually. Analysis, uncovering, and annihilation of evil. What is the true meaning of salvation for the individual and for all men? Is it not the perception and use of spiritual fact to eliminate ignorance and disprove the false, finite sense of God, man, and the universe? When, and as humanity understands the spiritual truth, it will be enabled, intelligently and scientifically, to analyze, expose, and destroy all evil and materiality, and this will be done in detail, exactly and systematically, for all that is false, however far removed from absolute truth it may be, must necessarily be a mistaken sense, or even sometimes a hint, of that which is true. Moreover, there is always a specific fact about any falsity which will correct and destroy it. One could not conceive of a mistake in mathematics, however big it might be, which could not be corrected with a specific counterfact. We can use the science of reality in a similar way. As we understand the divine system, operating as a calculus of divine ideas, we can destroy the mistaken conclusions of evil and materiality in an exact and intelligent way. We have already touched on the analysis, exposure, and destruction of evil, and it would seem that in dealing with any undesirable condition, these are the three definite steps that must be taken. whether the mistaken condition is in our home, our business, our characters, or in general human thought. These 3 steps are necessary in dealing with it. Firstly, we must intelligently analyze the problem. Secondly, we must expose the error of it. And thirdly, we must destroy the error by replacing it with that which is true and good. This is the process humanity has always adopted in dealing with evil and ignorance, whether consciously or not. Indeed, many thinkers through the ages have recognized these 3 definite stages of transition from the material to the spiritual. How then can we employ this process intelligently and on a wholly spiritual basis to deal with the vast problem of materiality? As we have seen, it is imperative to begin by understanding the true nature of reality, for only then can we analyze the problem of materiality intelligently, and thus awaken to the fact that the physical is always a false value, which never touches fundamental truth, although it may seem to do so. This is the first step. As soon as we take the first step, we begin to be, in a degree, master of the physical, and we cease to be its servant. This is always happening to some extent. Men have proved and are proving this fact constantly. The second step of exposure has now spontaneously taken place, and we have thus freed ourselves still further from materiality. The exposure of the merely material as unworthy of God or man lifts our standard, for a measure of spiritual reality is glimpsed. This state of improved thought we term morality. As this second step is firmly taken and established, the concept of existence as material begins to disappear from our thoughts and lives, and is thus in some degree annihilated. When this process takes place in numberless specific instances, we are using our numerals of spiritual consciousness, symbolized by the number 7, in 3 distinct ways: analysis, exposure, and annihilation, leading us from the physical to the moral and eventually to the spiritual. Thus we are availing ourselves of the process symbolized by the number 10, signifying the application of a perfect system of divine metaphysics to human experience. This symbol was originally derived from the 10 fingers, and in metaphor it illustrates the spiritual and scientific application of divine facts to material existence. Is this not why there were 10 commandments, which summarize our human duty to God and to man? It is important to understand and to appreciate this aspect of the system of salvation, symbolized in the Scriptures by the number 10. Spirit versus matter. Consequently, there seem to be 2 factors with which we have to deal. On the one hand, there is the forever activity of the eternal and infinite cause, the divine mind, God, translating its own ideal, or Christ, as an infinitude of divine ideas, which constitute the real spiritual universe. On the other hand, we have to face and deal intelligently with the false materialistic sense of things, which seems to constitute the material universe and mortality as a whole. The mortal picture is forever changing, and must continue to change as spiritual truth urges its claims on men. It must be remembered that the so-called material universe originated in darkness and ignorance, and was the outcome of what the Scriptures designate as the carnal mind, the cause and sum of materialistic thinking. Eventually, intelligent thought will have to face the scientific and unalterable fact of the Scripture. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Spirit and flesh never mingle, any more than mistakes in mathematics mingle with mathematical facts. They only seem to do so. Even though, to the ordinary thinker, materiality seems to mingle with spiritual reality, spiritual sense is always able to discern the unreality of the material and the eternal reality of the spiritual. It always has a firmament or understanding with which to separate between the real and the unreal. For the sake of clarity, let us define spirit as eternal reality, the divine mind, God, and his perfect universe of infinite spiritual ideas, the only true substance. And let us define matter as the temporal, the basic unreal, so-called mortal mind or mortal thought, and its finite conception of the universe as physical or material. The spiritual is the only reality, because there is but one infinite cause, spirit. The material seems real only to false mortal thinking, which believes in and supports its own conclusions. The material involves and includes all that is conceived of as hell, sin, disease, war, poverty, death, and so on. The only heaven is the ability to understand and to prove spiritual reality. The only hell is material thinking, a material sense of being. The spiritual is essentially scientific, and can be understood and used scientifically, as we have shown. It is ever available and demonstrable to spiritual consciousness, for it is the only, and it is always dynamic, because it is the nature of fundamental power. On the other hand, the material is never truly scientific, nor has it a fundamental principle that can be intelligently understood and proved. Its so-called power is usually more destructive than otherwise. The superiority of spiritual power over the material. It is obvious, however, that in spite of the veil of material reasoning and material conditions, the eternal harmony and perfection of the spiritual are to some extent apparent even in human experience. But this is always in spite of the material, and not because of it. What a harvest of progress in human affairs can and will be reaped as soon as humanity turns its attention to the scientific attainment and proof of true spiritual values. If the reader has now seen the possibility of utilizing the ideas of reality operating through numerals in a calculus of spiritual computation, and has also seen that the activity of these ideas must be of the nature of power and being, he should not find it difficult to realize that the material universe, as a mental concept and as the outcome of mortal thought and theories, can be controlled and transformed in every detail through a system of divine metaphysics. The conclusion is no vague theory, for again and again the effects of mortal thought, expressed as disease, calamity, sin, and so on, have been overcome by spiritually minded men and women. Moreover, many of these achievements have formed landmarks in history. Unfortunately, instead of being regarded as natural demonstrations of divine law and science, such incidents have been looked upon as miracles. In the realm of reality and science, there never is and cannot be such a thing as a miracle. Mathematics and music know no miracles, because even these human subjects approximate some measure of the nature of real science. Humanity has wrongly designated natural proofs of scientific and spiritual law as miracles, for no miracles can occur in eternal reality. Such incidents only prove that on certain occasions spiritually minded men and women have so understood the things of reality that they have subjected the so-called laws of mortal thought as they claim to operate in the material universe. The Bible teems with illustrations of the superiority of spiritual power over the material, and so does human history. Moreover, the Scriptures present an ordered story of the appearing of divine reality and the consequent disappearing of the mist of ignorance and materiality. They show how men can understand and use the ideas of divine reality on a wholly spiritual and scientific basis for their salvation. 1,000-year periods in Bible history. The story of the Old and New Testaments is the record of the ordered revelation and development of spiritual and scientific thought, and its effect in human experience in an improved sense of civilization and the gradual disappearance of a material sense of things. This development was symbolized in Jewish history in periods of 1,000 years, for among the Hebrews there was an ancient and deep-rooted belief that the material universe would not be completely subjugated by progressive spiritual thought and experience until 7,000 years had elapsed from the time of Adam. This period of time was determined upon because it was believed that the particular aspect of the divine nature symbolized by each day of creation or revelation would take at least 1,000 years or a millennium to establish in human thought. As they used the symbol of 7 days to present the perfection of the divine nature, the Hebrews believed that complete salvation would come about after 7,000 years or 7 millenniums. Consequently, Peter writes, "One day, one period of spiritual unfoldment, is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day." In Hastings' Dictionary of the Bible, we read, "millennium." The millennium was, however, present in the Jewish apocalyptic literature. In Slavonic Enoch, chapters 52 and 55, time is described as a week of 7 days, each of 1,000 years in length. These 6 days, that is 6,000 years, are said to have elapsed from the time of the creation to the judgment. Then will come a Sabbath of rest of 1,000 years, and then an 8th day, which shall be timeless. A similar expectation is to be found in the Talmud, Sanhedrin 97a, and it is not impossible that this conception can be traced back to Babylonia or Persia. One begins to appreciate the exact symbolic meaning and significance of the 7 days of creation when one realizes that the inspired prophets devoted 1,000 years of the scriptural record to the illustration of the meaning of each day. The dignity and grandeur of these days of creation cannot be fully perceived until one grasps this fact. Consider the vast meaning of a symbol which characterized the tone and import of 1,000 years of Bible history. Christ Jesus, however, who understood eternity, dismissed the time element of the millennium theory and proved in the most convincing way that the complete and perfect nature of God is ever present and ever available for all mankind. The master metaphysician, Jesus of Nazareth, was always thinking in the realm of eternity and science. He declared, at the beginning of the 5,000 years of Bible history, "Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes, and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest." To Jesus, time, place, human processes, and all material conditions were of the nature of mortal thought, and could be controlled and superseded by divine consciousness. Even a superficial study of the Scriptures will reveal that in the first 1,000 years of Bible history, from Adam to Enoch, the prophets were illustrating the meaning of the first day of creation. Let there be light. They indicated how this light would analyze, expose, and destroy the hopelessness and degradation of the ignorant belief in the Adam man, made of the dust of the ground. They also showed, in the story of Enoch walking with God, the glorious result of accepting the light of revelation. This first period was concerned with creation. The light of true creation exposed the darkness of blind belief in material creation. The second 1,000 years ran from Noah to the building of the Tower of Babel. The story of Noah and the ark illustrated the meaning of the second day. Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. The ark was a symbol of the value and purpose of spiritual understanding to separate good from evil, and thus to purify human experience. In the third 1,000 years, from Abraham until the children of Israel reached the promised land, the dry land of the third day of creation certainly appeared in thought. All through this period, the emphasis was on the definite and identified nature of all things. Abram was identified as Abraham. Jacob was identified as Israel. Moses identified God as the I am that I am, and also Yahweh, the God of Israel, and the Hebrews became known as the children of Israel. In the fourth 1,000 years, the kingdom period, culminating in the prophetic age, the meaning of the fourth day of creation was illustrated with amazing accuracy. False government was exposed in all its corruption. But it was also in that period that the Hebrew prophets gave to mankind the essentials of the divine system, when they wrote the priestly documents embodying the days of creation, operating in a calculus as numerals of consciousness, thus illustrating, "Let them be for signs," symbols, and for seasons, a calculus, and for days, numerals, and years, eternity. In the 5,000 years of Bible history, Jesus exposed the fallacy of the time theory, as we have seen. He demonstrated eternity by overcoming death. He not only established the meaning of the fifth day of abundant life and multiplication, but also the meaning of the sixth day of perfect manhood, and, in his ascension, of the seventh day of rest. Jesus specifically stated that he had not come to destroy but to fulfill. In consonance with this statement, he fulfilled the 7 days or periods by demonstrating their ever-availability in the calculus of reality. He proved man's eternal oneness with divine principle, God. He thus recognized the accepted system of divine symbols, but lifted it into the realm of eternal science. Even as the prophets of Israel had previously accepted the Chaldean record of 7 days and lifted it into a symbol to interpret monotheism. Thus Jesus fulfilled the law and the prophets. Jesus established for all mankind the possibility of forever knowing and using the infinite facts of reality. He therefore taught that the kingdom of God is at hand. It cometh not with observation, but is within you. In fact, he taught and proved for all time the availability and power of spiritual ideas when understood and accepted. From the moment that Jesus of Nazareth, the master metaphysician, came upon the scene, the belief in 7 periods of time began to give place to the understanding of scientific truth, which knows no time. The ever-present science of reality. Reality is not a question of heretofore or hereafter, but of here and now. In pure reality there is no place and no time, but the eternal now of infinity. Sir James Jeans writes in The Universe Around Us, "We may avoid this sort of crude imagery by insisting on space, time, and matter being treated together and inseparably as a single system, so that it becomes meaningless to speak of space and time as existing at all before matter existed. Such a view is consonant not only with ancient metaphysical theories, but also with the modern theory of relativity. The universe now becomes a finite picture, whose dimensions are a certain amount of space and a certain amount of time. The author is convinced, after many years of deep research, that the purpose and teaching of the Bible, hitherto regarded as merely religious, is now in our scientific era manifesting itself as both spiritual and scientific in the highest sense. This could not have been recognized before, because general human thought was not prepared, as it now is, to accept a scientific and logical basis for religion. As we have considered in 5 chapters the human problem of today, the scientific symbols of the Bible, its system of divine metaphysics, and the scientific operation of this system in its application to the human problem, let us now turn to the Bible itself and see the illustration of the divine system contained therein. As the reader will remember, this system is built on the spiritual and scientific facts indicated by the symbol 1, divinity itself; by the symbol 3, the essential nature of God, the divine Trinity, life or Father, truth or Son, and love or Mother; by the symbol 4, the Word, the Christ, Christianity, and science; by the symbol 7, the days of creation, developing into infinite numerals of spiritual consciousness; by the symbol 10, the application of the 7 to the human problem through the analysis, exposure, and complete destruction of error, and lastly, by the symbol 12, indicating any measure of the proof and demonstration of God's true nature as life, truth, and love, through the understanding and utilization of the Word, the Christ, Christianity, and science. This scientific and spiritual system of salvation must begin with the individual, and he must apply it to every detail of his human affairs. Then it will swell into a vast paean of universal scientific metaphysics, whereby all men can understand and prove for themselves the things, the ideas of reality, as necessarily and as naturally as they use and prove the ideas of any subject. Such a state of being was foreseen and foretold throughout the Bible, and its eventual attainment must surely be a certainty.